We're here today at Goliad State Park, kind of highlighting the men that built and restored the mission back in the 1930s. That work was done by members of what was called the Civilian Conservation Corps, an organization that was started by Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the government in 1933 to help young people, particularly, be able to get a job, to be able to work, to be able to make money, because the Depression had, 1932, the previous year, was the worst year of the economic depression. So it was important that people got some help. And this was a project where the people not only, it made them feel good, they were going to have a job, they would work for their wages, and they would send a lot of those wages home. What's unique to the mission grounds here at the state park is that the men here that did the work were not your typical CCC members that were teenagers and maybe into their 20s up to age 28. These men were called the Veterans Corps, and they were a special branch of the CCC that was created by Franklin Roosevelt in 1933 as well, that would hire these veterans who had no pension, they didn't have a job because of the Depression. They had fought for the United States in various conflicts like the Spanish-American War and World War I, Philippine insurrection, and many other things up to this time period. So it gave, so it's kind of a unique, they were Veterans Corps all over the United States as well, but they were in the minority. And so it's kind of interesting that here at the state park, we have the Veterans Corps are the ones that rebuilt and built up the mission grounds and the facilities here for the state park. The patch here, as you see, that was indicative of the Veterans Corps. That's their particular patch. In other words, the young men could not wear this patch. This is only for the gentlemen. And that group would have been men in their 40s to their actually into their 60s working here at the Presidio. And so what I have here is a vast display of some of the chevrons that were worn only on one side of your shirt, not both like the military, that had this different branches and specific jobs that people would have. And then here's some of the patches. These red ones are more indicative of the patch that everybody wore, including the Veteran Corps as well. They could put that patch, for example, on one of the various caps that they wore, this overseas cap, because they got a lot of surplus from the United States Army as far as the uniforms went at first in the early 30s. That would change by 1939, but at this point, the clothing and everything you're seeing on these workers were surplus from the United States military. This shirt that I'm wearing is a shirt that the men would have worn World War I overseas in Europe. Now it's surplus because the uniform is different at this time in 1935. So, so this is just a lot. You can see some of the equipment. This is a canteen. It's an old cavalry canteen from the Pancho Villa era, kind of, you know, the U.S. cavalry going down into Mexico chasing Pancho Villa. But it's outdated now in 1935, but it's kind of handy, and the government saw that because you could just clip it onto your belt loop. You go out to do your quarry work or whatever, and when you got there, your full canteen, you could set it in the shade and then do your work, and then when you're done for the day, you clip it back on because you're going to be able to carry your tools and everything as well. So it's kind of handy. That's not what it was invented for. And of course, they would market the U.S. is from when it was with the cavalry, but the CCC, they would stamp a lot of this stuff like that. So pennants, you put that over your bunk. There was a catalog, what little money you would save for your person. You could buy these patches, pennants, little knickknacks that are relative to the CCC. Now you might say, well, why would they spend that money when they're all starving? But it's a little bit of money, and it gives you what they call esprit de corps. We would call it confidence. it builds the confidence of the individual. Here you're downtrodden, you don't have a job, and so all these little things build your self-esteem, your confidence. So that's why they did all of that.
Okay, I'm just going to mention a little bit about the clothes that they were wearing. I don't know if you noticed here that some of us are dressed differently. Like Mike said, it was mostly regimented, like in a military fashion, but again, it wasn't so regimented. Some of the guys were wearing different clothes that they wore. Mike's, like I said, was wearing a surplus Army shirt from World War I, and I'm wearing more civilian style clothes. Jerry's wearing something different too, and you can notice his hat is different than John's hat over here. He's wearing a fedora, but it was regimented, but again, it wasn't. So everybody had their own style. A lot of times, if it was hot down here, they'd even take their shirts off and work just without a shirt and do their work that they need for that environment. But they all were all treated the same, that kind of thing. The clothes didn't much matter. Everybody got enough to eat, got enough place to stay, and that kind of thing, and that's pretty much what they did. But Mike said, like the age limits or differences was it went from teenagers to all the way to 60 years old, depending on where you were at, where you were assigned, and that kind of thing. It was regimented in a sense, but again, it wasn't. The clothes were different. Whatever they thought they would make them comfortable with what they had.
As Mike was talking about, the CCC in this area was made up of veterans for Goliad here, and there were 28,000 veterans hired from throughout the CCC, throughout the country. The ones that came here, when they came here, there was a lot of work to be done. The mission itself was in ruins. And so when they got here, they had to have a place to stay. And a lot of times they set up barracks tents until they finally got a permanent barracks residence set across the area over here. And in that residence, they would have bunks like these. It's an old World War I bunk. And each man would have their own bunk and probably a trunk to put their personal items in. And they would be probably have a kit like this for their meals, and they had personal items they could store, the things that they bought from the little stipend that they were allowed to keep. Jerry, would you like to?
Yeah. They also would be able to get a lot of the tools for their trades. For a carpenter, they would need a variety of saws and hammers and nails and all those kinds of things. What we have here are some of the parts for the masonry program. This particular one is if you are plastering a wall or putting it, the plaster on, they call that mud, and it goes on, and then you can take the trowel and scoop it up, put it onto the wall, and therefore smooth it out. And the same thing with these other tools that are used to smooth out the cement or the plaster. This is for corners because you can see that it has edges to it. And other ones for smoothing out the cement once it's laid down on the floor. You can do that. All these types of tools were provided to them because these guys were coming in and they didn't have anything. Their families were starving to death when they came here. So they had to either learn a trade or use the trade that they had. And therefore, they were able to really do a good thing. They felt good about themselves. They saw that they made accomplishments. and the people around benefited from those. Very rarely in government does that happen. So, it's one of those things where they were pleased with themselves. The people in the nation were pleased with what they saw being done. Good things.